So, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you first hear about guns in the United States? You're probably thinking gun violence or like mass shootings, right? Well, the topic of gun violence in the United States has always been a two sided argument, and it holds its own significant impact on us historically within American history. Now, according to Nerneth Eisenman and Mark Silver, reporters for the National Public Radio, it is calculated that the United States has the 28th highest rate of deaths caused by gun violence in the entire world, which roughly 4.43 deaths per 100,000 people are averaged. Now, keeping those numbers in mind, a lot of mixed opinions have come about with this, whether or not guns should be banned or guns should be kept legal within the country. Now, as an undergrad student here at UNLV, majoring in criminal justice and working part-time law enforcement in the Army National Guard, I've been able to see both sides of the argument and see why it has evolved so much in the United States. Now, by learning more about the topics of gun violence and gun control, we become more aware of it and why it has become such a huge topic of debate, especially in a political manner. So first off, I will discuss the history of gun violence and how it has evolved in the United States. Second, I will then talk about why certain people choose to favor gun control. And lastly, I will then discuss why certain people choose to oppose gun control. Now, to start off, let us start with the history of gun violence and its evolution. So basically, gun violence has been a well-known topic and has its own historical significance within America. Gun violence is basically the concept of committing a crime in which one is either harmed or killed by the use of a gun. Now, this basically began in the early 20th century as mass shootings already started to begin by that time and restrictions were already being placed on the sales of guns. Now, what you may think, what could possibly drive these people to even want to commit these kind of acts? Well, you see, according to Amanda Nickerson et al., who all specialize in bullying prevention and psychology, they mention that prenatal risk along with childhood aggression leading into adolescence may lead them to think that gun violence is the answer. Now, with that in mind, moving on, in the 1960s, laws were basically proposed and passed to control the sales of guns. Now, with these laws, the NRA began to oppose them because they were basically violating the Second Amendment. Now, with that in mind, conversations about gun control, gun violence, there are always avoided everywhere, like including at the dinner table. But that debate has always escalated more and more day by day through a political sense. Now, Samantha Benthian, a writer for the History News Network, she mentions that while Americans mourn the lives lost, politicians remain divided about the best solution because they are either for or against gun control. So now that we get a better idea of the history behind gun violence, let's talk about why certain people choose to favor gun control. Now, many politics want to implement gun control laws because they want to reduce the amount of mass shootings that occur across the U.S. Now, this side of the argument argues that it is the gun that commits the crime, and that it is the gun by itself. So basically, by banning these guns, they can't be accessed for them to commit crimes. Now, gun control laws basically came into effect in the late 1960s, especially after the assassinations of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. And along with that, crime rates were also rising too as they were involving the use of a gun. Now, the main law that came into effect was the Gun Control Act of 1968, a federal law that basically prohibited anyone from owning a firearm if they were a convicted felon, a drug dealer, or showed signs of a mental illness. Now, with these laws, they were thought to reduce gun violence, and basically in light of a lot of gun violence acts happening across the country, many have chosen to favor these gun control laws as they would think that it would reduce the number of such acts. Now that we understand those who favor gun control, let us now discuss the opposing side. Now, to better understand the topic of gun violence, it is vital to see where people who oppose gun control are coming from. Now, this side of the argument now believes that it is not the gun itself, but rather the person holding the gun causing the crime and causing the acts of gun violence. Now, according to Samantha Benthian again, writer for the History News Network, proving that it is the person committing the violence and not the gun, it is important to note that in recent mass shootings, the majority of weapons used in these situations were purchased legally. Now, along with that, one obvious problem too to spot on this side is that gun control laws are also unconstitutional because it violates the Second Amendment, basically the amendment that gives us our right to bear arms. Now, with the NRA, they also oppose this gun control because possessing a firearm is basically the right of every American citizen. And not just that, but it also ensures our own personal safety. Now, with the influence of the NRA, the 1986 Firearms Owners Protection was passed, which directly went against the Gun Control Act of 1968. Now, with the influence of the NRA and this Firearm Protection Act, more and more politics joined together to form that opposition against gun control. So now that we understand gun violence, gun control, and how it has all evolved in the country, let us now review what we talked about in this topic, in this speech. Now, learning more about gun violence and how it has evolved in modern day America, we become fully aware of what it is and why it is now what it is today. We talked about the history of gun violence in the United States and how it has evolved. Second, we then talked about those who favor gun control, and lastly, we then talked about those who oppose gun control. Now, in conclusion, gun control affects everyone in the United States, whether or not we are a victim or not. Now that we know more about gun violence, you understand more of how it started and how it has evolved into what it is in the country today and why it is such a big topic of debate within politics.